everyone, happy Thursday, and today we have an awesome treat for you. We really do. We have Dan from Samsung who's going to talk about open source and open standards and how you can get involved. I'm really excited. Wears so many hats. We met at about 2 years ago at the Global Diversity CFP Day. It really helped me with my public speaking. I learned so much on that day. I didn't vlog it, so really apologize to everyone that I didn't vlog it. I will next time, and he has helped out in so many other events. But I'm not going to do him any justice, so I want to let Dan introduce himself. So Dan, please go ahead.
Sure. Well, thanks, Eddie, for thanks for inviting me on. Yeah, it was like 2 years ago. I forgot about that one actually. That was one. That was. I think I've done 3 global diversity CFP days so far, and that was really a great initiative and continues to be. I hope we can continue to do that in the current situation, or I hope that by the time January rolls around, we'll be in a better position to be able to do another global diversity CFP day. I think that would be fantastic. So my name is Dan Appelquist. I work for Samsung. I lead the developer advocacy group for Samsung Internet. As Eddie said, I have a number of hats. So I do developer advocacy around web and web standards. I also participate in the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, which is the standards body that develops web standards, or that manages at least some part of the web platform, and has a role in developing new web standards and new web technologies that are being brought to the web platform. And I also work on a number of other ecosystem projects. So things like MDN. I'm wearing an MDN shirt today, by the way, because MDN is many web and JavaScript developers will be aware of MDN. It's a documentation site for web technologies that's run by Mozilla, but it really is cross-browser. And I play a role there. I'm on something called the Product Advisory Board of MDN, along with people from Google, people from Microsoft. A number of other companies are involved in that as well. W3C is also involved in that. So that journey has been helping to bring better documentation to the web across all browsers, and that's another kind of like ecosystem thing that I've been involved in, which is also kind of related to open source. I've also been involved for a number of years now with something in the UK here, with the something called the Open Standards Board, or the UK government actually Open Standards Board. I did some work prior to coming into Samsung. I did some work for the UK government. I helped them to refine an already existing open standards process, which is how the UK government anyway thinks about open standards and what open standards it selects to be kind of mandatory for projects that it works on. And I mean, if you've been around London and the UK tech scene, you've probably come across a lot of people that have filtered in and out of GDS. GDS, I think, has had a great reputation. It still has a lot of people, a lot of good people working for it. It's still doing a lot of really good stuff, and I continue to play a role in this Open Standards Board. I want to talk a little bit more about that, but we can bookmark that for a second, because I think they have a really good definition of what an open standard is, right? And I think that's something that that maybe we can get into in some discussion. So when we started talking, Eddie, when you and I started talking about what could be a potentially good topic for this, we talked about open source and open standards, right? So open source, obviously, I'm extremely passionate about open source. I also, for a while, I was on the board of the JS Foundation, which then became the OpenJS Foundation, which is an open source foundation that manages the kind of governance around JavaScript open source projects. There is also a really strong relationship between the open source and open standards. but they're not necessarily the same thing. And I think it's interesting to kind of explore the relationship between open source and open standards, especially when it comes to the web. Um, we're used to thinking about them in the same breath, I think, because people tend to think about open source. When they think about the web, they think about mostly open source projects like the Chromium project, the WebKit project, the Mozilla, various Mozilla projects, Firefox, Gecko, and other projects that are related to that, but also things like Rust language and JavaScript language itself, ECMAScript. These are all run as open source initiatives and open standards projects. But how does that relate to the kind of the way that open standards are built within W3C? Is the web necessarily open source by nature? Well, no, actually, because for a while, Internet Explorer, for instance, was a very closed source browser, right? But
That's a swear word on this stream, okay?
Sorry.
Just to clarify.
Sorry. But for a while there, that was the top browser, right? You needed to build for IE. I lived through that. Hey, come on, I'm a .com refugee. Sorry, that's not a really good way to. I shouldn't be using that word actually, but I am a .com kind of survivor, and I lived through that time when IE was what you needed to build for, right? But luckily we're kind of out of that phase now. But that was not the only closed source browser. Opera Presto platform also was a closed source browser, and that platform lives on in Opera Mini, by the way. So there are closed source implementations. There have been closed source implementations of the web, and there have been open source implementations of the web. And some of those open source implementations are possibly more open than others because of the governance structure around them, right? So we know that just because something is open source and has a license on it doesn't necessarily mean it's something that can be influenced very well, or it might be dominated by one organization. So anyway,
that's really true. Actually, I want to interrupt, so apologies.
No, absolutely.
That's a really good point. It's also projects can be open source, but they might have a really high barrier to entry because their roadmap is hidden, their issues are somewhere else. So they kind of, I had that at the Ministry of Justice when I worked for them. It's changed now. It's going back, I don't know, 6 or 8 years, but they put their code open source, but they didn't log any issues open source. It was all Jira hidden. And if people contributed, they kind of ignored it, and they just kept on putting out their sprint work or their release work open source. So they were ticking that box to say it was open source, but it's not what I would call open source. They weren't encouraging people to get involved. And if people did try to get involved, then they kind of ignored it. So it really wasn't the right way to do it. And I spent a lot of my time there just explaining to people that's not the benefit of open source. You're kind of doing a checkbox exercise, but you're not getting all the benefits. It's about being inclusive and having those different perspectives. I really like it that a lot of these projects now are putting their issues on the same repo where the code is, and having their documentation maybe in the same repo in a docs folder, or maybe in a separate repo, but it's all there, and they're trying to improve, trying to get more people involved. And as you get more, I believe, as you get more people involved, people will find more issues and be able to make more improvements, and it just lowers the barrier to entry over and over again.
So like, for a really good example of that has been the rise of public feature lists for browsers, for instance. And I think Edge did this. Chrome does this. Mozilla has this as well. Where you can go to a list of features. Like, here are a bunch of new proposed features for the web, new standards that are, what should we be prioritizing? What should they be prioritizing? And developers can come in and upvote or downvote things. And that's at a kind of different level than GitHub issues, right? It's more at a kind of conceptual level. But it's very useful, and it gives a roadmap. It shows a roadmap. I think also, it's been very good to see lots of beta and developer builds being distributed of all these different browsers. I mean, one of the things that I'm really happy about is that when we started building the DevRel team for Samsung Internet, this was back in 2016. One of the first things we agitated for was the release of an open beta, right? And like every other browser has, right? And we were able to do that, and now we have an open beta where developers can come and have a run with new features before they come to the stable version. But obviously other browsers have been doing that for a while. Apple has their Safari technology preview as well. So there's lots of that is definitely part of the whole ecosystem.
I think Chrome was probably, from what I remember, I mean, Firefox might have done this as well, but they were quite keen on having those betas really early, and then you had those really enthusiastic people who ran the betas, and then they could raise issues a lot earlier, right? Getting user testing, and I think that just adds so much value. I remember being one of the beta users of Chrome a long time ago when it first came out, and I was really excited about it.
So but the other thing that you raise is getting more people involved, and I think that's one of the kind of like key things that I've been working on for years. Really, is trying to raise the profile of standards work, and so that more people become involved at the beginning when new features are being developed. Because very often we found that, or in some cases we found that a new feature is developed by a bunch of browser engineers talking to other browser engineers, and they come up with this great idea, and then they're like, okay, well, this is great, we're going to put this into the web platform, and then a bunch of developers try and use it, and they're like, well, you know what, this doesn't actually meet our use cases, right? And getting more developers and more broader sets of developers, more diverse developers involved in the standards process to begin with, at the beginning phases, really can help to create better standards, and then to create better technologies which are actually implemented in browsers, right? And there's not a clear pathway between standards being developed and that technology standard actually being implemented in the browser and being able to be used by developers. Sometimes things are built as a prototype ahead of time by a cross industry group of people. Sometimes they're prototyped and pioneered by one particular browser, and then that browser has to convince the other browsers that this is a good idea. We're seeing a lot of that happening with APIs that are coming out of the Chromium project right now. But there are other APIs that are coming out of Safari, WebKit, and out of Firefox, Mozilla as well, that follow that pattern. Very often, that's the point at which a web standard is coined. Something is actually created. And then it gets worked on by a group of people. And I think one of the key elements of an open standard, coming back to my kind of like definition of an open standard, right, which is like this comes from the UK government, open standards. So you should be familiar with this, having worked for the MOJ. Is that it's a collaboration between all interested parties, not just individual suppliers. There's a transparent and published decision-making process that's reviewed by subject matter experts, right? So that there's a governance structure.
I think it's important when things are reviewed, and like you said, it's not just one person or one group of people making decisions. It is reviewed, and they do.
It's got a public review.
Yeah, which I think is really important. It does really tie into the open source and the GitHub. I know you're going to show us some GitHub stuff shortly. And I think that's really important. I actually implemented recently open banking, which is another new standard that's come out here. I don't know if it's UK based or Europe based.
Yeah.
I didn't look at it for very long. It was just for a prototype for a client for a high street bank. But what was really interesting was we actually ended up using a third party that had implemented to consume the open API, because each bank had took the standard and interpreted it slightly differently. So it wasn't consistent like it was meant to be, and you actually had to, maybe make lots of conditions for different banks, and in the end we ended up using a third party that abstracted that away from us, which is crazy.
Oh.
And so, but I think they did that, although it was an open standard. I think that it was all agreed. I don't know for sure, but I think it was agreed behind closed doors and then published. That's why I find it weird when people say, yeah, we'll make our project open source once it's finished. It's like, well, that's just too late. That's no good then. And a project is never really finished.
Being developed in the open light, I think, is a very important aspect of open standards. That's transparency, right? And that way you also know what organizations are behind that and what their motivations might be, right? So, and I think that's important for open standards. It's actually important to know who's at the table and who's by majority, what organization is controlling that thing. It's, organizations like W3C allow you to delve into that information so that you can see where that stuff is coming from. And that's also important from an intellectual property perspective, because open standards also need to be royalty free. They need to be released under a royalty free license. And again, that comes from the UK government guidelines. And W3C is one of the organizations that releases standards on a royalty free basis. I end up talking to, I work for a big mega corporation, right? And I end up talking to other people I end up talking to big mega corporations an awful lot about what royalty-free license means. And big corporations, especially ones that have a lot of patents, get very nervous when you start to talk about royalty-free licensing. There's this whole nuance to that royalty-free licensing doesn't mean you're giving away any intellectual property. It means you're licensing it for free, but only for the implementation of that thing. So if a company has a whole bunch of patents, they're not giving away those patents simply by going through the W3C process, but it enables a kind of way of working within W3C and other similar organizations that gets some of the commercial issues off the table. Because at least you know that the people you're working with in that organization aren't trying to hide intellectual property patents in their specifications so that they can charge royalty fees down the road. And that's one of the key elements of the web, is anybody should be able to build a web browser. Anybody should be able to build with web technologies without being able to be charged royalty fees, which is a key enabler for open source, right? So you couldn't have open source browsers without that kind of promise from the beginning. But yeah, if I can, maybe I can just go through an example of what I'm talking about.
Sounds like a good
So
idea.
I have here something I prepared earlier.
Awesome. Blue Peter, right? That's a British TV program with kids. I don't know if that makes sense to everyone.
I've been here long enough that I can get those references now.
Oh, we should recognize this. This is some GitHub now. We recognize this.
Yes. Right. So I wanted to kind of highlight this one, the Webxr Device Api. I think it's a very good example of a new web technology that was brought into being in kind of a very good collaborative kind of way. The page that I'm on now is actually the page for the review of this new technology by the tag group, the W3C tag, which is the group that I'm the co-chair of. And the work that we do is in reviewing other people's specifications. So when they have when the Webxr group was ready to have a review from a set of architect people, they submitted this review, right? And they submitted it along with, where's the specification? What's the explainer for this? And in this case, we can follow this link and we can see, you're not going to see that. Okay, we can follow this link and we can see, what are the goals of this? It's to add virtual reality and augmented reality to the web, right? So this is pretty exciting stuff. And we can kind of like see in kind of like plain language, along with code examples, what is this going to do? What's this API going to do? And then if you If you want to get into further into the details, you can go to the specification URL, which sits here in this at that URL, and then you can go into their issues, right? Because this issue exists in our W3C tag repo, but you can actually go into the Immersive Web issue list, and you can see all the issues that they're dealing with, and there are like 30 open issues on the Webxr specification. My point here is that the way that web standards are done right now, and I'm going to toggle that off. The way that web standards are done right now is very similar to the way that open source is done. In fact, all of the web standards initiatives that I'm involved with are being run in GitHub, and there's a reason for that. They all moved to GitHub, over the past 5 or so years, because that's where the developers are, and all of those initiatives, all of those standards that are being developed, want to get more developer feedback and more developer engagement. Also, by using that one platform, by using GitHub, we're able to link from an issue in our repo to an issue in their repo. It shows dependencies. There are all kinds of economies of scale that we gain by being able to have all that stuff sit in GitHub. And when we're working on a new document, we can issue pull requests, we can review pull requests. We do all that stuff. It works exactly the way that open source works, but we're working on text documents. We're working on, in this case, usually markdown documents or documents that are written in some kind of hybrid markup that then allows us to generate what looks like a W3C web standard, that kind of thing.
I think that sounds awesome. I'm just want to kind of, elaborate a bit more on contributions to open source or to open standards. Is not just about code. I think people kind of get in this mindset that, oh, I'm not a coder, or I don't know how to do X, Y, and Z in code, so I can't contribute. And I think it's important to for everyone to know that you can get involved in testing, documentation, raising issues, ideas, suggestions, or agreeing with, adding more information to a bug that someone else has found. There's so many things. And I want to kind of give a shout out to Ruth here, who says that the contributions this month have mostly been on documentation. I think that's awesome. I think that's great, because that usually gets forgotten about. And I think it's important to realize that that's a really good way to get the momentum going, get used to how the project works, get used to, to network with people. So if you have any questions, they can help you, and then you can dig deeper into, if you want, code and all the other things.
So in open standards world, it's flipped, right? Most of the contributions are on documentation. And then we sometimes have some code because we've got to demonstrate the use of this thing. Or I'll give you another example with Webxr Device Api. It enables virtual reality within the web environment. And one thing that you often need when you're in a virtual reality space is you need to visualize the controller that the user is using. So if you're holding a controller out in front of you, and you're moving it this way and that, within the virtual environment, you want to see the positioning of that controller with respect to the virtual environment that you're in. But you don't want to just see a generic controller. You want to actually see the controller that you're using to give it a bit of verisimilitude, right? Yeah. So the Webxr Device API people built a whole open source JavaScript library, including open source definitions, 3D models of a lot of all the major kind of popular controllers, so that when you're building your Webxr scene and environment, you can include all of those for free in whatever you're building, so that you can automatically allow the user to see the most appropriate thing in front of them when they're in that environment. So that's another really good example of there being like a strong relationship between open source and open standards. They're all coming from the same kind of root.
No, I really like that. I really do like how you're right. They do tie in a lot together. There is a lot of overlap. And I think it's making people aware, because I know there's so many standards out there. We all use them on a daily basis without even realizing, and we kind of take it for granted.
Yeah.
And I think it would be good if we want to, I mean, sometimes we might complain about something, but we never do anything about it. Whereas if we could raise the issue or it's probably an issue that's already been raised to talk about new features coming up. Actually, there have been times where I've searched for something and I see, oh, it's in discussion to see if it's going to get brought into the next standard. And I think that's, really important for people to get involved.
I actually do, coming back to my kind of tab for a second here, I actually do recommend that people might want to take a look at, if you want to take a look at a snapshot of new features that are coming into the web platform or they're being proposed for the web platform, our issue list here under W3C tag design reviews is like a really good place to see some of that stuff actually. And you can, like, there's some new version of the geolocation API that's being proposed here. Stuff having to do with web app manifest, CSS page orientation descriptor. You know, it's all over the map in terms of the entire web platform. Virtual keyboard API, that's something that we've been talking about a lot. And then you can delve into each one of these, and each one of these is going to include a link to the explainer. What is it? A link to a security and privacy self-review. That's something that we have developed in the tag to encourage spec developers to think about all the security and privacy issues that come up with their specifications. A link to the repo for that particular thing, and then you'll often see like a discussion that's happening between us and the developers of the spec, where we're kind of doing a bit of back and forth about about some of our feedback. But also, it's just you can take a look at some of these explainers, and you'll see something that I think is really exciting is that there's never been more new features being kind of proposed for the web than there are right now.
That's true, and I'm just kind of reading the chat, and I think it's important also for people to realize that it's not about trying to come up with a whole new addition to the standard or a whole new big piece of functionality or whatever it is. I think I believe, I don't know if you agree with me, Dan, but the smaller the better, because if it's smaller, it's more digestible by everyone can understand it, and it can be incorporated a lot easier. Whereas if it's a really big piece of an idea or a feature or documentation or code or whatever it is, the bigger it is, the longer it's going to take to get understood by the community and the maintainers, and to get included. Whereas if it's smaller, I just think it can just be included so much easier. I would rather have 10 like one-line PRs rather than kind of one PR that's got 10 lines in it that are, okay, if they're related, it's different, but say they're completely not related, then it's just becomes so much bigger and harder to understand. And people sometimes ask why the pull requests aren't getting reviewed or accepted, because it's just, you need more time to understand it. Whereas if it's smaller, I think
if it's something that's quite radical, and it changes the whole way that developers interact with the platform, then it can be, it can take a long time because you've got to review it. Multiple people have to review it, that kind of thing. I mean, in the tag, when we're reviewing new web technologies, we come across both sets of things. We come across incremental changes that are often, we review it and we say, that seems to fit together with the rest of the design principles that we have, and with the rest of the way the web platform works, and that we kind of pass that along. When it comes to new things, I mean, Webxr is probably an example of that. You're adding a whole new set of capabilities to the web. Okay, well, you've got to be really careful there. And what about accessibility? What about, what about different kinds of devices? What about security and privacy? What about being able to kind of spoof the user by being able to paint over the entire screen? Well, you could easily phish the user in that case. There are security vulnerabilities that you've got to work out. There's a whole bunch of, so Webxr, the reason I wanted to highlight it is because it's one of the bigger things, but we end up doing a lot of kind of like small and medium size additions and changes to the web as well.
Yeah, it's not all just about I think all these standards have been built up from smaller building blocks. There's not just like kind of one standard that kind of, or one big piece of, or kind of, I don't know how to call it, like a feature that describes everything. It's broken down into many smaller discussions and smaller, I guess, parts of the standards.
Yeah. I mean, I think another really good example of something, there's some new work that's going on the web app manifest file, for instance. Now, if you're building progressive web apps, you are probably familiar with the web app manifest. It's something that is developed by developed in a W3C group. It's basically a JSON file that describes your web app, that enables you to install that web app onto devices that understand aspects of the web app manifest, right? And it's pretty well implemented across browsers. There are always new ideas that people are coming up with for additions to the web app manifest. And that's a very fertile area for innovation on the web right now. So if you go to that GitHub issue list where the web app, or if you go to the manifest file specification, you'll find, maybe it's better if I actually do this on
if you can bring it up, that'd be awesome. I think, because PWAs are really hot at the moment, right? People want to write a web app that can also work on a mobile, stick the icon on the homepage. So it'll be really good if you can bring it up and actually show some concrete examples.
I mean, if you're first of all, if you're looking at this file and implement the web app manifest, I would actually say don't do that, right? Like, you might actually be better off going to the MDN document about web app manifest, which has a lot of really good documentation about it, and then shows you the different browsers that it works on and stuff like that. But if you are interested in the specification itself and contributing into it, then you can see the latest and greatest version from in W3C space and W3C land. But where it's actually being worked on is in the GitHub repo for W3C/manifest, right? And if you go here and if you take a look at issues, you can see they're working on 57 different issues around news that are being added to this web app manifest. And we're just talking about this one thing here, which is like a JSON file. Is this really so complex? But if you look at this, you can actually see, a lot of people have different ideas and different particular ideas to adding payment dictionary for specific, I don't even know what some of these things are. Internationalization support, extremely important, right? So getting involved can mean simply finding a specification that you're interested in or that you use, and then drilling down into the issues registry for that thing and taking a look at the issues and seeing, is there anything here that I have an opinion on? Looking at the conversation about this particular new feature or this particular new addition to the manifest file, I have some information that might help this conversation along, because actually the way that this is looking, this would not be good for me and the web app that I'm building. I think it should actually work like this, or I need this new feature or this property in order to make my web application work better. So that kind of information is extremely important and often gets lost in the conversations that are happening between the implementers that are building these things. Because remember, the implementers tend to be people that are writing browsers. They're the ones that are actually writing the Chromium code in C++. They're the ones that are writing the Mozilla Firefox code in Rust or in C++ or whatever. They may have done web development, but they're not like web developers for a business, for a career. So getting that feedback from web developers on a regular basis is super important, I think, for this whole process.
I remember seeing, that's so true. So I remember seeing a really good tweet, I think, or a poster that said, you are not the user, right? No matter what you're building or what you're doing, you're not the user. So you make certain assumptions. And when someone uses it, I don't know if people were on my live stream earlier in the week where I was adding some things to a bot we have in our Discord channel. I was putting people's locations on the map if they added their location. And it was all happening in real time, like really awesome. But when I was testing it myself, and then when I got people to use it, oh wow, did we find a lot of bugs. I got people to raise issues, get their green square on GitHub. But yeah, we found so many issues. And I think, it's great that these people are building browsers and are using these standards. But the value to them and to everybody else is getting feedback from the actual users. So I think getting involved, no matter how small people think their idea is or their feedback is, I think they should suggest it. I don't know what your thoughts are on this. For me, if someone has a suggestion or idea and they raise an issue or a pull request on one of these open standards repos, then what's the worst case that can happen? Someone replies with, "This is not quite right. Thank you very much for the idea. Close." They still get the green square contribution. They might even spark another idea in the maintainer. The amount of issues that I've had raised on my open source projects, and I think this is not quite right. But actually, you've given me an idea where we can use your idea to do this other idea, and it kind of, might evolve, and that's where the collaboration comes in.
So 2 things I want to say to that. First of all, and I want to toggle screen again and show something for a second.
No
I want to show a couple of things, right? So I'm going to toggle screen. Okay, so one of the things that really was drilled into my head when I worked for GDS for a while was this whole idea about putting user needs first. And that's something that I had prior to going in, but if I didn't have it already, it was certainly something that I had coming out of that experience, because there's a strong emphasis on putting the user needs first. And I think that's something that we try to build in to the work that we're doing on design principles for the web platform. So we have this document called Web Platform Design Principles, which we're working on very actively, actually. And section, subsection 1.1, put user needs first, right? So when you're thinking about a new feature that you want to add to the web, put those user needs first. How are we going to find out those user needs? They have to be channeled from the developers that are actually building those applications directly for those end users. They have to be from the end users themselves as well. And we have a couple of links through from here to another thing that we wrote called the Ethical Web Principles document, which is, actually that's the wrong document, which is trying to make the point that the web should have an overall positive impact on society. That's a whole separate podcast or stream. But the other thing that I wanted to make a point about, because you mentioned what's the worst that can happen when you get involved, and I think that people can sometimes feel quite, maybe when they have tried to get involved in an open source project or in an open standards project, they've initially been rebuffed, and that can happen a lot because you have a lot of people that are engineers that are working on these projects. They've been working on it for years. Somebody new comes in. They don't speak exactly the way that they're used to hearing people speak, and they can say something gruff or can say something that rebuffs those people, and that has created this kind of cycle where people feel that their voices are not being heard, and it has also created a vicious cycle where diversity is a big problem. Diversity in web standards world as well as in the implementer world in open source. And I'm sure, as somebody who's participated in Global Diversity CFP Day, I'm sure you're aware of this, and I know that you're working on the positive side of this. I think one thing that additionally helps to bring those new voices in and ensure that those new voices are being heard is having a modern code of conduct. W3C just updated its code of conduct from a very outdated code of conduct to an extremely modern, much more code of conduct. And I encourage people to take a look at it. Is a code of conduct going to stop bad behavior? It's not going to stop all bad behavior, but it will
It does help. I really believe, yeah,
Helps. It
code of
really
conduct does
helps. It
help.
really does. I've seen it. I've seen it help. I've used codes of conduct myself. I helped to, uh, again, with JS Foundation, there was this whole governance thing around codes of conduct that and encouraging a more diverse and inclusive participation. You need a code of conduct. The code of conduct needs to be really good, really progressive, and modern. And I'm really glad to say that we were able to get this new modern code of conduct out there. If you read through it, you'll see that it takes a lot of stuff from geek feminist uh, guidelines and stuff like that. It's very good, very modern, and importantly, it was approved by all the members of W3C, including like very conservative organizations around the world. So I'm hoping that actually the existence of that code of conduct actually helps other organizations that are trying to move to a more progressive code of conduct, gives them the green light that, hey, even W3C, which is this relatively long time organization, can move to a more progressive code of conduct. So anyway, I think that also helps because it provides covering fire. Also, if somebody is rude uh, to somebody coming in on a GitHub issue or on a mailing list or something like that, other people might be reluctant uh, to to tell that rude person, you know what, you overstepped. You need to really apologize for what you said, and you need to be more welcoming and inclusive in your approach. But they're going to be more likely to do that if there's a code of conduct which they can point to, which says like, look, you specifically contravened this item of the code of conduct. This is not good, or this gets very close to a code of conduct violation. You really need to step back. So it does help to modify behavior, and I think it overall it will in time produce a more inclusive environment.
I'm glad you mentioned code of conduct. Actually, something I want to talk about two things. One thing is about the code of conduct, and one thing is about picking the right project to contribute to in open source. And a good way to do that is if you look at the closed issues or the closed pull requests, have a look at the conversation. If things got accepted, great. If things didn't get accepted, then did someone write, look, really sorry, this doesn't quite match X, Y, and Z, and then they close it? That's fine. I was doing a live stream earlier in the week where I was trying to get everyone watching contributing to an open source project that they wanted to. So they would send me links and we would look about a contribution they could make. And someone made an improvement, which I thought was all these links that weren't clickable. So I suggested they raise an issue and raise a pull request where they make the link clickable. The maintainer of the project, it was quite a popular project. I didn't recognize it, but it was quite active and popular with the community. They just closed it and didn't put a comment, didn't say, well, thank you very much, I don't want links on them, or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. It's their project. Yeah. They can decide what they want to do. But it's just explaining why so people can contribute more. So my suggestion was actually they should spend their efforts contributing to another project. It doesn't matter if things get accepted or not. It's just you want to understand why things don't get accepted. So in the future, you can make another contribution that is more likely to be accepted.
Yeah, I think you don't need that kind of negative energy in your life, right? Like
Exactly.
if you're trying to make a contribution, trying to make like people don't contribute into open source. People generally contribute into open source because they want to be helpful, and that you really need. So the projects, and this goes for open standards as well, that are more welcoming to those views and to those voices are going to be the more successful ones, I think, and are going to be the more vibrant ones, and the ones that attract more implementers and actually make more of a difference. That's certainly the impression that I have, and that's certainly what I'd like to see happen.
Yes, because a lot of places, a lot of projects, or a lot of companies or my clients say, oh, I want to make our project or our community or our teams more diverse. And I think, well, you're looking at it the wrong way. You should make it more inclusive, then the diversity will kind of come from that. People will, like you said, will want to be there. Minorities will want to be there. They'll feel welcome and just,
If the environment isn't diverse in the first place, then it's likely that there was a problem that wasn't just a bunch of really people who weren't diverse to begin with got together. It's likely a hostile environment for people who are not in that group, and that's something that I've seen again and again. And it does need to people sometimes are in denial about that
They
their
are.
communication style can create. But I've seen people who have been extremely, I wouldn't say hostile, but very short in their and aggressive in their communication style, realize, through engagement with the community, that is a problem, and modified their style of communication to be more inclusive and to be. I think that it is about communication style, and it's about understanding that not everybody has your communication style. So when you're engaging, especially if you're the leader of a project, you need to be more liberal about what you accept. To use a kind of standardsism when it comes to communication, and you do need to be conciliatory. So even if something comes in and is a GitHub issue that raises a idea that you already discussed and dismissed, 6 months ago or something like that, you don't just close it summarily. You say, sorry, we already discussed this in this particular issue here. It takes 2 minutes.
Absolutely. It takes less than 2 minutes, but it makes such a difference to the community, not only for that person there, but people looking back in the future and seeing if they want to get involved. I mean, to give another example, and this goes on to the code of conduct I was about mentioned a minute ago, was, I'm going to pronounce this name wrong, so apologies if you're watching, but someone in my community, Gaushik, made a contribution, added a code of conduct to a project that they're really passionate about and is in their area. I won't mention the project or the organization, but so they added a code of conduct. They used the open source covenant code of conduct. I think it's one of the examples that GitHub gives you as an option.
Covenant.
Yes, that's the one. Thank you.
Yeah.
And the person wrote back, the maintainer of the project, pretty big project, big organization. And they wrote back saying, I don't believe in code of conduct. I actually believe in no code of conduct. And they linked to someone's repo where they've written why the benefits of no code of conduct. And I was reading this thinking, okay, the two people writing this, or the person who added the link to the comment, and the person who wrote it, obviously fit a certain demographic. And I just thought, what an awful way to be. They said, we just should be grown up. People should deal with their own stuff themselves. I was like, how is that a community? And that's a
monoculture.
Exactly.
And that's I would never be involved, and I would never recommend that anybody be involved in something like that. I mean, when we have, it's the same with conferences and events, right? When we get involved in conferences and events in my team, we have a strict set of rules. The event has to have a code of conduct. It has to have certain diversity credentials in terms of the speakers and the way that it's put together. Otherwise, we don't participate. And I've had to have many conversations with events along those lines, saying like, look, we'd love to come and talk at your thing, but you don't have a code of conduct. And some of them have been like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, sorry, we should have a code of conduct. And other ones have been, well, we don't feel like we need a code of conduct because everybody's going to be fine at our event. It's just like, okay, well, that's an event we're not going to participate in that case, and we're not going to be part of that community.
And I think it's okay to say that, right?
Sorry?
I interrupted you. I was going to say it's okay to say that, what you just said.
It is. It's okay to say that. It's more than okay. Because if they don't hear it, then they won't change their behavior. And it's also, I think, so important for people to step up and say codes of conduct are important. Behavior is important. Diversity and inclusion is important. These are things that we need to generate more of this, and we're going to get, it's important for the reason that it's the right thing to do, because it's about helping our fellow humans and making sure that everybody has the opportunity to participate. But it's also important because it produces better stuff. At the end of the day, what you end up with is better, and that's been shown again and again and again. So it's like it's a no. I don't understand people who push back against that.
I can't agree more. I just want to bring up another comment from the chat. Ruth says, it's good to hopefully I brought up the right one. Yes. So when you creating an issue, even though it makes sense to you, you need to think of it that you're writing it for I don't know, a 5-year-old. So therefore, either the project maintainer might be really busy, just kind of skim read it, or someone else, especially if it's a good first issue. It's I think important to if you want to be inclusive, to add all the information you can. I think I see some people either saying good first issue, but they don't explain the steps that they need to do, and therefore it doesn't encourage people to do it. It's all about lowering that barrier to entry, and like you said, using the right terminology.
So using simple language is so important too. Like we have done an awful lot of work in the web standards area that I'm in the tag, but we try to influence others to do the same, to simplify language. So, given that most of the web standards are written in English, there is a way to write English that makes it more comprehensible to people who are not English as a first language. And there's a way to write English that makes it less comprehensive or less comprehensible. And in particular, if you use local idiom, if you use metaphor, hit it out of the ballpark and stuff like that, if you use like sports metaphors and things, there are all kinds of ways that people write that makes what they write not inaccessible to especially to non-native English speakers. And that's one thing that we've been trying to get a lot better at recently, because if you're a non-native English speaker, you're already working in a language that's not your first language, trying to decode, some idiom or metaphor that the author thought was absolutely obvious, but just doesn't transfer to the culture or way of thinking that the reader has, is really going to mess you up. So keeping things simple, you don't have to dumb things down completely, but you got to keep things simple and keep your reader in mind when you're writing these kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And you got the slang, or like you said, or sports metaphor, but also abbreviations. Like I didn't realize it's going back a few years. For days of the week, instead of writing Monday, we wrote Mon. And when English is your first language, it probably makes more sense. But we're trying to be inclusive to the whole world here. And I think
date formats as well is another one between US and UK.
Exactly.
Use a universally understandable date format. Don't say number slash number, because that's completely ambiguous depending on where in the world you are. Okay, it's ambiguous depending on if you're in the US or not, basically. So
and it can be tricky, right? Because if it's a number over 12, then you're like, okay, that's obviously the day.
Yeah.
But if it's like 6 and 7, you're like, oh, is it month? Is it day? Is it day? Is it month? Yeah. And you're absolutely right. Let's just avoid confusion, especially. And I think it also goes to when people are raising, have questions. So I think when people in tech, especially when they're new to tech and they raise questions, this goes for everybody in general. But I think when people are new to tech and haven't had questions asked to themselves, they don't know how to ask a good question. And let me elaborate. So,
sure.
When you've got kind of 5, 10, 15 years experience, you've asked lots of questions and you're still asking questions. So I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but because you get asked lots of questions, you think you might write your questions a bit more detailed or a bit differently. And I find new people to tech, they kind of, it's almost like, I'm going to use an expression here, which is probably really bad because we're just saying not to use expressions, but like blood out of a stone. Like they take a screenshot, but they give you like the button. They say this button isn't centered, but they'll only show you where the button is and you can't see the rest of the page, so you can't see what's on it. And I just think you don't be scared to share a bit more, and don't obviously make it a book. You don't want it to be massive, therefore people have to read through a lot. Just it's about being concise and having the right and enough information.
It does come with experience, but I mean, reading what other people wrote as well when you're contributing, and I mean, you also understanding a little bit about the culture of the community that you're trying to contribute into does help, right? Because if you read what some of the other people have written, then you can kind of get into into the culture a little bit more and understand what information other people are providing. I mean, it's also incumbent, by the way, on these projects, whether they be open source projects or open standards projects, to provide good issue templates that say, please provide this information. Please before you raise an issue, please look at this list of things that we've already done so that you don't raise an issue about something that we've already done. And by the way, if you're going to raise an issue, please include this information and include, all this, make sure that you review this template, make sure that you review this document, that kind of thing. And that can also really help, because it can give people the expectation, what do I need to do in order to contribute into this community? Obviously, community maintainers can't go overboard. You can't ask people to read a whole novel just to contribute in an issue. But GitHub also allows you to have multiple different issue templates. So you can say, okay, yeah, I want to contribute. I want to open an issue. Oh, is your issue like a feature change request, or is it a totally new thing, or is it some kind of are you talking about a typo in one of the screens, or there are multiple different types of things, and that's another way or rather maintainers can be more friendly to contributors.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's important. You're right. Just finding that balance, and I'm guilty of this as well. We just created a new repo earlier this week for our community, because we get a lot of questions in Discord, and then the Discord questions get lost, and then we get a lot of repeat questions. So what we're trying to do is get people to raise questions in GitHub, and by raising the questions in GitHub, they also get the green square for that day, which counts as a contribution. But then we can use the links and refer back to people. And if someone asks the same question, just saying, well, this question was asked before, you have a look. If you have any more questions, just add it to the ticket. But I need to do templates for that. So I want to drop a link in the chat. And if anyone wants to raise an issue, to say, raise an issue template, then do that. And you'll get the green square. And if multiple people raise it, then don't worry. We'll just, close a few of them, and you'll still get the green square for today. So I want to kind of show people that what's the worst that's going to happen if you raise an issue or a pull request. Even if you did something that wasn't up to whatever the maintainer wanted, then the worst case is it just gets closed. And I know I repeat that, but I think a lot of people are scared to contribute. And once they've done it once or twice, they go, oh, this isn't so bad. So my strongest suggestion to everyone is just, get involved, make a contribution, no matter what it is, and then it'll only snowball from there. Again, another expression, only get better from there and accelerate.
And it's to a certain extent, it's about getting. It's like any community. It is about people in the end. This is about people collaborating together and working together, and communities that have that kind of esprit de corps, where it feels like even if we disagree, we're still working on the same thing, and we still are, passionate about the web, or passionate about Webxr, or passionate about whatever. Those kinds of communities are the most healthy ones. It's where you end up with very heavy weighted communities where there are one or two experts that kind of dominate the entire conversation. I find those conversations tend to be the more toxic ones.
Absolutely.
Or those communities tend to be more toxic, and I don't like those kinds of communities. So, I personally prefer more collaborative ones, where you can see that there's positive collaboration going on between different people, and that people like each other. Why would I be somewhere where I don't like the other people that I'm working with?
Absolutely.
I think that's important too.
I completely agree. And you don't want this kind of one person at the top. And I think you have it pretty level, right? And I think it's also important. It's okay to disagree. You don't have to say yes to everything and agree with everybody. But and that's how I value when I build teams for my clients, from government departments or high street banks or startups. I don't want people who say yes all the time. I want people to disagree with me, and then we can work on it and make it better. But it's just that having the right attitude to know how to kind of say it in a more polite way. And I think that's a lot of value comes from that. That's why I think I want to have another stream in the future on soft skills and collaboration. And I hate the word soft skills, because open source isn't just about code. And actually, I really believe it's not about code anymore. It's more about people and community. And then the code now and documentation are all secondary. I don't know if you agree, or if you want to kind of maybe explain that slightly differently or better. But
I think it's equally about code. I mean, when it comes to open source, I think it is about I think it's at least equally about code and community. Definitely, community plays an equal role, at least. I think it also depends on where the project is in its life cycle, though, right? So, I mean, if it's an extremely active project and there's a lot of new work going on, then it tends to be more technically focused. If it's more of a maintainer or adding new features, that's when I think the community aspect especially comes into play, where you really want to be extra open and inclusive to new ideas that are coming in. Once you go past the seed phase of an open source project, and the same goes for open standards, that's when people start to take notice of your thing, and they're like, oh, well, I could use that for this use case that I have. But I need these new features in order to do that. So how can I add those new features to this existing standard or this existing code base? And that starts to snowball. And that's the exciting bit, I think, of any project like this.
Yeah, when a project or a community can continue moving when certain people are on holiday or they're busy and they're working on other things. If it continues moving, then I think that shows that it's got a certain momentum, and it's really hard to get an open source project or a community past that, because you usually need that gatekeeper who's always that one person that's reviewing pull requests and accepting. And that's why in my community I like to have other people. I'd have all my pull requests on my projects and my communities reviewed just like anybody else's, but also I like other people to do the reviewing of other PRs, accept them and merge them. What's the worst case that can happen? Something gets missed, and then you just submit another pull request to tweak that thing that got missed. I mean, it's not the end of the world. I really believe in doing little and often and kind of moving forwards than rolling backwards. I appreciate on enterprise projects it might be slightly different and be a bit more strict. Yeah. I suppose you might need a 2 or 3 people, maybe multiple people to review things.
Different environments have different approaches to agile methodology as well. A lot of this is intermixed with kind of how you apply agile thinking. And how big the team is and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's a whole different set of topics. But yeah, I fully support the idea of having a whole thing about communication. Maybe instead of soft skills, I mean, I think the thing that I tend to think about is communication skills, right? And so it's documentation, how to write an issue, how to engage with maintainers, how to be a better maintainer, how to write issue templates, codes of conduct, enforcing, by the way, codes of conduct, and how do you enforce, like not just having a code of conduct, but
True.
Like what happens if actually something happens that is against the code of conduct? Do we all kind of look away, or do we, do you actually do something about that? And having a reputation for, oh wow, they actually did something when there was a code of conduct violation. That can be
that's very true, actually, taking action as well, not just having
that makes a
checkbox exercise.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's a really, really good point. And we had
having been somebody that I've had to invoke codes of conduct in open standards discussions before, but I've also had to enforce codes of conduct in physical events and eject people from events. And I know it can be a difficult and very awkward conversation, but you've got to have it, or else you're sending a very bad message to the rest of the members of your community.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if you're saying like, oh yeah, I know you made this code of conduct violation, but I know you, so it's okay. That sends a very bad conversation, a very bad message to the rest of the community that basically the code of conduct doesn't matter, and it needs to be enforced. People need to take it seriously.
It does, and I think sometimes things can from what I've seen, even in my online community, I've seen something said not out of trying to attack someone, just said but wasn't meant in that way, and then it got resolved and everyone apologized and they realized it just got taken said incorrectly and taken incorrectly, and it went a bit wrong. And then if someone goes rightfully out, and you can clearly see they're attacking someone, I don't even involve the conversation. It's just like ban, block, gone. You can tell if someone's being really aggressive or not.
I've got a very timely topic for your communication or your skills discussion, which is how to apologize.
Okay.
Right? If you've done something wrong and you've contravened a code of conduct, or you offended somebody, right? How do you apologize? And we had this, I don't know whether you paid, there was some U.S. political stuff recently on this in the U.S. Congress. But if you give a non-apology apology, then that's it's almost worse than not apologizing, right? If you're like, yeah, well, I'm sorry that you were offended, but, it's like, okay, no, just say, I'm sorry. I unreservedly apologize and leave it at that. Or, make it clear that you really are sorry when you, because that's the way to de-escalate. Some of these things, it's about de-escalation of a potential crisis, because people get very defensive when they feel that they're being attacked. And how do you maintainers need to de-escalate that. People need training on that kind of stuff and need to think about those things when they're engaging in an open source community or in an open standards community, because you're working with a bunch of people who are from around the world. They come from different cultures. They have different ways of communicating. And maybe they're working for another organization. Maybe they're working for another company. That all those challenges come together, and you've got to really think about these communication issues.
Absolutely. I've had a couple of questions from the audience, and I have missed some, so apologies if I've missed them. I'm going to bring them up now, and we will go through them. So this one was asked by Shubham, hopefully I've pronounced your name right, about open source licenses. So we were talking at the time, I think we were talking about, we mentioned a couple of things about licenses, and then we got into the code of conduct. I don't know if you want to talk a bit more around licenses. Are these licenses themselves open source? Can people contribute to the licenses, or which ones can
you mean for open standards?
I guess so. I mean, we may talk a bit around it, and Shubham can jump in the chat if we haven't quite answered the question.
So open standards tend to have their own licenses. So W3C has its own document license, which continues to be kind of modified over time and has new features brought into it, that kind of thing. It's similar to an open source license, but it has to do, because it's not about code, it's about the thing that happens before code, right? And that's what a standard is, really. It's something that then developers can pick up and say, I'm going to implement code that I'm going to write code that implements that standard. So then you end up with something that, like the Firefox browser, that's built and released under Mozilla's public license, but it's written according to the standard that is released under W3C's license, or under WG's license for different parts of it. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question or not, but like there are equivalent to like GNU license and MIT license. Some things that are released out of W3C are released under MIT license. Open source projects in particular. And then, but I think it also raises the point about ethical licensing. So that's one thing that's worth mentioning is, I mentioned the tag ethical principles before, and I kind of touched on that. It's one thing that we're trying to do is push people to think about the web, not only as a platform that you can do anything on, but as a platform that should, through intrinsically, be more oriented towards ethical use than other software platforms. So intrinsically, just from the ground up, you should not be able to do things that harm users, or it should be more difficult to do things that harm users on the web than, say, on a native platform. Likewise, there are a lot of efforts right now to bring more ethical thinking into open source licensing, and I think that's very exciting stuff because it's thinking about, okay, not only am I going to license my code and license it open, but I'm actually going to say, and you cannot use this in a missile guidance system. You cannot use this to kill people. You cannot use this code, in doing something that's unethical. And if you do, then I can go after you. And I have a legal basis for getting you to not, you are not licensed to use this code in that. And that licenses are enforceable in a legal framework. Licenses are legal documents. So I think that's an exciting trend that I see right now.
Awesome. I think that's a really good explanation. So thank you very much. And hopefully that covers that question. If not, it will come up again. We've got a few more actually now as well. So once people start asking questions, then other people start asking more. Again, it's just showing the community that it's safe to ask questions, like we were saying with open source projects. So that's awesome. So Surihari, I'm so bad at pronouncing people's names. I'm really apologize to everyone watching. How can I start contributing to a complex project on GitHub? If it's an open standards project or any project, for example, if it's complex.
I come back to what I was saying about web apps manifest, right? So I think any project, any large project, complex project is made up of multiple parts, and all those parts are made up of individual features. And I think the key thing is to focus in. How can you start contributing? Focus in on something that you care about. If you have a particular, especially if you are using an open source project, if you're a developer that's using an open source library, for instance, and you have a particular issue with one particular thing, that's where to start. Start with something where you have passion. When it comes to web standards, look at the currently open issues on that particular standard that you're using and see, is there something here where I have an opinion? Is there something here that catches my eye because actually this could be useful for my application? Even if you come in and just thumbs up a particular comment, so you're upvoting people's comments in a comment stream, that helps to contribute. That provides positive energy towards the development of that standard.
I love that, actually. I don't often talk about that, and I forget. You're right. If someone asks a question or puts in a comment, do give it a thumbs up to show that it has importance to you. I think that's a really good way to get involved and just start that question. And then you might just start off by giving it a thumbs up, but then next time you might actually put in a comment. Next time you raise an issue, people reply to that. You start networking and meeting new people. Then you start raising PRs. It just start. My biggest advice to everyone is just start.
And then pretty soon you're like at the yearly conference of that community, and you're like leading a panel or something.
Yeah, exactly right. And that is so true. The amount of conference I've been invited to, or talks I've been asked to do, or clients I've got have mostly been from my open source work and networking through that. And so, everyone who watches my channel knows I rave every day about, getting involved in open source. No matter how you get involved, that's entirely up to you, but just start getting involved and it will just accelerate, and you never know what it leads to. So that's true. Really, really true. Right, I missed a couple of questions. Let me bring them up. Let me see. I should have queued them up. My apologies.
Anybody asking about my lobster?
Does it sing? Is it the one that sings? Well, that was a fish back in the day, wasn't it?
No.
From Azing, how do you decide what project to contribute to? I know we touched on this slightly earlier on, but it'd be good to reiterate for anyone new, or how to find them browsing GitHub, best place to start. Great question.
I think it really, I don't know. I mean, I think it really depends on what you're involved in, or, what your interests are too, what projects you're aware of. What things that you're using, which are on GitHub or which are on, which are in open source, which are in the open source domain. I mean, I find it's a bit about how do you break into the community already. I think it can also be about word of mouth. Who do you know that's already contributing, and what are they contributing into? And is there somebody that can be a gateway for you Uh, do you have a manager if you're working as a developer who is friendly towards helping you, mentoring you by suggesting a pathway or if you're a student, do you have other students that you're working with, or an instructor or a lecturer or somebody like that who has ideas about open source contribution or which things to contribute into. But again, I think the most important thing is what are you using right now? So is there like a component or a library or a feature or a product that you're using or a standard that you're using, and you have a feeling like this could be better?
I think you're right. To try and just search GitHub for projects is quite hard. It's what projects are you using already?
So much there.
What projects are you familiar with, or what projects are your friends working on, or are inclusive, or you've been to see a talk about the project and you got excited about it. You will find other projects once you find a project. So just pick anything, I think, and get started, and then you will just discover so much more people, more projects, and everything else from there.
Having seen a talk, I think seeing a talk is a very good entryway too, because that could also give you an idea for what the culture is of that project. And especially if somebody is talking about a project and they're like, and we'd really appreciate your contributions. Come here and contribute into this, please. That's something to pay attention to. So yeah, I mean, a lot of those talks are online right now. They're all online, but so that's another place to look, But
that's true.
OpenJS World, for instance, they just ran their conference a few weeks ago. And if you're into JavaScript, there's like a ton of YouTube videos of all of their talks that are talking about different APIs and different libraries. And there's a ton of opportunities to contribute right there. So if you're into JavaScript, and if you're somebody who wants to hear about like what the latest and greatest on JavaScript is, go take a look at OpenJS World. And that's one good example, but there are plenty of others for different communities.
Next question. Mohit, sorry I missed this question earlier, asks, modifying open source code of an app and making it a different app also count in open source? Yeah, if you fork the project, I know some people try to clone a project, remove the history, and then kind of use it as their own and then build on it from there. I don't think that's a very good way of doing it. I think you need to give credit where credit is due. I don't know. Dan has a lot more experience in this area, but I would recommend.
I mean, I think it also depends on the license, right? The license might allow for forking. It might not allow for forking. You have to pay attention to what the license is. I think the more appropriate way usually is to make a pull request on that particular project, right? So if I want to make this app different in some way, if I want to add a feature into it, then make clone it and write that thing, but then make a pull request and say, this is what I think ought to be in this, and so, but I think it really depends on the project and the scope of it. Yeah.
But yeah, always try and give credit, even if it is just in the README or something like that. I think it is important. Don't try and. Everyone knows that open source is built on top of open source, which is built on top of open source. So it's not trying to hide something to say you built everything doesn't help anyone. And I think people are less likely to get involved in your open source project if they think it's not so transparent.
Yeah.
Awesome to get some other people in the chat. So Anita, thank you very much for jumping in with some tips and suggestions in the chat for other people. I love that. I love it when the community gets involved and gives back. So I believe this is giving back also to the community, right? It's not just about asking questions. It's also about answering questions and getting involved in the conversation. Right, we did. Azing says thank you very much for the response as well. So excellent response. So that's good. I think, have I missed anyone else's questions? Hopefully I haven't. Trying to catch up with the chat. And I'm conscious of time. I know we're kind of coming to an end shortly. While I'm looking through the chat or why people are copying and pasting their questions, just at the end, if I missed it already, just want to say I hope you've enjoyed today. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll just give a moment for new chat to come in. And Dan, anything else you'd like to add towards the end?
Well, I suppose I should add a promo for let's see.
I can put some of your links in the chat as well to Twitter. I think the ones you sent me.
Our developer website. So, I mean, if you're interested in web development, and especially if you're interested in progressive web apps and Webxr, you might want to come check out our developer blog and developer hub at samsunginter.net. You can find out about, for instance, AR and the web, and that particular page features my floor as a cameo. So this is and a lot of these are there's a lot of stuff here about progressive web apps, Webxr, other new technologies that are being added to the web. So that's a good place to go. And then I also, encourage you to take a look at, when it comes to open standards, take a look at w3.org, see what's happening, see what news. It's not a particularly friendly looking website. They're working on redeveloping the website. It's a little 1990s.
Hey, get involved. If they're redeveloping it, everyone get involved.
Yeah. But I mean, take a look at the news, and you can see new thing happening in Web App Manifest, media queries level 4, JSON-LD, virtual workshop on web and machine learning. There's all kinds of stuff that's happening. There's events as well, and talks and appearances that you can take a look at. And then finally, I'd just like to, since I wore the T-shirt today, I just wanted to give another boost to MDN. If you're looking for information on web technologies, this is the place to go, and it's a place that I've been contributing into a lot. It's a place that all the browsers, even though it's a Mozilla thing, it's a cross-browser initiative. To really make sure that web documentation and JavaScript documentation is at a high quality level. So, and that's another area, by the way, where you can contribute. So contributing into that is very similar to contributing into. It's a similar kind of culture to contributing into any open source project, and it's something definitely we encourage.
Awesome. I did share a link to samsoninter.net as well in the chat. So everyone go have a look at that. The VR stuff does sound really interesting. Especially web VR is becoming, really big and popular. I went to a hackathon a while ago on VR, and yes, my team won. I got to add that in there.
That's
but
awesome.
It was interesting to see.
Awesome.
Having never done VR before, that was quite interesting. So I'm surprised we won. But we thought of the user, whereas other teams did really awesome first-person shoot 'em ups, and they were much better than ours visually and functionally and so on. But I didn't think of the user. They kind of just rebuilt Call of Duty practically. And so it was just kind of that, where ours was just very different, and not that we had tried to be, we just didn't know any better, and it worked quite well. But it was interesting that we did consider using the web, but this was a few years ago. I don't think it was where it is now, whereas web VR does look really, really interesting.
I mean, we're just now, these new web VR specs or WebXR, which is VR and AR. Are just now coming into browsers. I mean, there were some initial specs a few years ago, but now we're coming out with this really much more fully featured set of specs, and it's a very exciting area. That's a whole nother stream. I think that I encourage you to have at some point.
Nice. Well, we'll definitely do more in the future. Getting lots of positive. Definitely lots of positive feedback from people saying a really good discussion. And if anyone does have any questions, leave a, or if you think of any later on or we've missed them, then leave a comment below in the YouTube video and I will tweet them over to Dan. Or actually, you know what? I shared Dan. Let me share Dan's Twitter in the chat, and you can always tweet him. I mean, it's just below his name as well, but just to make it a bit easier.
Feel free to tweet me at any time.
Yeah, send a tweet over and get your questions asked, and then that's awesome. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us, on taking time to join us on this live stream today and sharing your experience and knowledge and enthusiasm for open source, open standards, inclusion. I think that's awesome, and it's great to hear your perspective, because everyone hears me shout about open source all the time, but it's really good to see the open standard size and your opinion and views on all of that. And I've learned a lot from you before and now, so I think it's great to share that on here.
Thank you for inviting me. Really fun.
More than welcome, and look forward to having you on again in the future as well, especially when things change. And everyone watching, don't forget, join the Discord. We can continue the conversation between live streams, and I look forward to chatting to you all soon. Everyone have a great day, and we'll catch you all soon. Dan, I want to put the holding page up, but stay tuned if you can for a little bit longer, and we'll pop back and just have a wash up afterwards.
Will do.
Thanks, Dan. Bye, everyone. I don't know why I'm waving. It just feels normal now.